My name is Emily Carter, and until last year, I believed that loyalty and hard work were enough to build a good life. For almost 12 years, I worked at the same logistics company. I started as an assistant and slowly climbed my way up through positions that nobody else wanted. I stayed late when others went home. I answered calls during weekends. I learned every department, every process, and every problem that could bring operations to a halt. I wasn't the smartest person in the company. I wasn't the most connected, but I was reliable. People trusted me. And over time, that trust became my greatest asset. By the beginning of last year, everyone knew a major promotion was coming. Our regional operations director was retiring after more than 20 years with the company, and management was looking for someone to replace him. To my surprise, my name was on the short list. The moment I heard it, I felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The position would double my responsibilities. It would increase my salary significantly. It would also put me in charge of more than 200 employees across multiple locations. For the first time in my life, I felt that everything I had worked for might finally pay off. When I came home that evening, I shared the news with my husband, Ryan. I expected him to be excited. Instead, he looked strangely uncomfortable. He forced a smile. "That's great," he said, but something in his voice felt wrong. I asked if everything was okay. He shrugged. "It's just a lot. What if the job changes you?" I laughed. "Why would it change me?" "Because people become different when they get power," he replied. At the time, I thought he was joking. Looking back, I should have paid closer attention. Over the following weeks, Ryan brought up the promotion constantly, not in a supportive way. Every conversation somehow turned into a warning. He said successful women often forgot about their families. He said executives were always stressed. He said higher salaries came with higher expectations. He said our marriage was already strong enough and didn't need more money. The comments sounded reasonable when taken individually, but together they formed a pattern I didn't want to see. Whenever I talked about future plans, he changed the subject. Whenever I prepared for interviews, he seemed annoyed. Whenever someone congratulated me, he became quiet. At first, I blamed the pressure. Then I blamed myself. Maybe I was talking about work too much. Maybe I was becoming obsessed with the promotion. Maybe Ryan simply missed spending time together. I kept making excuses for him. The truth never crossed my mind, not once, because the people we trust most are often the last people we suspect. A month later, I received confirmation that I had advanced to the final stage of consideration. Only 3 candidates remained. I was one of them. That evening, Ryan's mother called. Linda had never liked me very much. She wasn't openly hostile. She preferred something far more effective, constant criticism disguised as concern. When Ryan told her about my promotion, there was a long silence. Then she laughed softly. "I hope Emily remembers that being a wife is more important than being a boss." Ryan didn't defend me. He simply changed the subject. I pretended not to care, but the comment stayed with me. Something was changing. I could feel it. I just didn't understand what it was yet, and I had no idea that while I was preparing for the biggest opportunity of my career, someone was already working behind the scenes to destroy it. The first anonymous complaint arrived 2 weeks later. I didn't even know about it at the time. Life continued normally. I went to work, prepared reports, attended meetings, and spent every spare minute getting ready for the final interview. Everything seemed fine, at least on the surface. Then one morning, I noticed something unusual. 2 colleagues stopped talking when I entered the break room. The silence lasted only a second, but it felt strange. Both women smiled awkwardly and immediately changed the subject. I told myself I was imagining things. People became quiet all the time. It meant nothing. Or so I thought. Over the next several days, similar situations kept happening. Conversations ended when I approached. People exchanged looks. A few coworkers seemed distant, not unfriendly, just cautious, as if they had heard something they couldn't quite believe, something about me. I tried to ignore it. The promotion process was stressful enough already. The last thing I needed was paranoia. Then one afternoon, my friend Jessica from Human Resources called me. Jessica and I had known each other for nearly 8 years. We weren't best friends, but we trusted each other. Her voice sounded unusually serious. "Do you have a minute?" "Of course. Can you come to my office?" The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. Jessica closed the door. She looked uncomfortable, almost nervous. "Emily, I shouldn't really be discussing this with you." My stomach tightened. Discussing what? She hesitated. Then she lowered her voice. "We've received several anonymous complaints about you." For a moment, I thought she was joking. Complaints? About what? Jessica sighed. "That's the problem. The accusations are vague, nothing specific enough to investigate properly, but serious enough that management has to document them." I stared at her. "What accusations?" She opened a folder. "Someone claims you're creating a hostile work environment. Someone says you're manipulating subordinates. Another email suggests you're taking credit for other people's work." I felt as if the floor had shifted beneath me. None of it was true, not even close. Jessica knew it. Most people who worked with me knew it. But anonymous complaints had a way of creating doubt, especially during promotion reviews. Who sent them? She shook her head. "We don't know. The emails were anonymous, different accounts, different names, different wording, but they started appearing right after the promotion shortlist was announced." My heart sank. That couldn't be a coincidence. Someone wanted me removed from consideration. Someone was actively trying to damage my reputation. For the first time, fear began replacing confusion. Who would do something like that? I left Jessica's office feeling shaken. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I replayed every interaction from the previous weeks, every conversation, every disagreement, every employee I had ever disciplined. The list was endless. Management isn't always popular. Maybe someone was angry. Maybe someone felt overlooked. Maybe someone wanted the promotion themselves. All those explanations seemed possible. What never occurred to me was that the person behind it might already be sitting across from me at the dinner table every night. That evening, Ryan was waiting when I got home. "You look exhausted," he said. "Long day?" I nodded. "Something weird is happening at work." Immediately, he seemed interested. "What kind of weird?" I explained the anonymous complaints. His reaction surprised me. Instead of sounding angry or concerned, he looked thoughtful, almost relieved. "Well, maybe someone sees something you don't." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" "Nothing. I'm just saying nobody gets anonymous complaints for no reason." The comment hit me harder than I expected. "You think they're true?" I didn't say that, but maybe you should ask yourself why people feel that way. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. A strange discomfort settled between us. Ryan eventually changed the subject, but I couldn't forget his reaction. It wasn't the response of a supportive husband. It wasn't even the response of a concerned friend. It sounded more like someone trying to validate the accusations. The thought bothered me all night. The following week, things became worse. 3 more complaints arrived, then another, then another. Management could no longer ignore them. Questions were being asked, files were being reviewed, and suddenly the promotion that had seemed almost within reach started slipping away. I could feel it happening. Years of hard work, years of sacrifice, years of building trust, all threatened by a faceless person hiding behind anonymous emails. What I didn't know was that the worst accusation hadn't arrived yet, and when it did, it would force my boss to begin an investigation that would uncover a truth far more shocking than any of us imagined. The next complaint changed everything. Until then, the anonymous messages had been irritating but manageable. They contained opinions, rumors, personal accusations, nothing that could be verified, nothing that could seriously threaten my position. But this one was different. This one accused me of misconduct. The email claimed that I had manipulated vendor contracts to benefit a personal friend. According to the sender, I had influenced purchasing decisions and violated company policy. The accusation was completely false. I had never done anything remotely similar. But unlike the previous complaints, this allegation involved something management was legally required to investigate. That was when my boss called me into his office. His name was David Marshall. For nearly 6 years, he had been my direct supervisor. He knew my work better than anyone. When I entered the room, he looked frustrated. Not with me, with the situation. "Emily, sit down." I immediately felt my pulse quicken. He closed the door. Then he slid a printed email across the desk. I read it once, then again, then a third time. Each sentence felt more absurd than the last. "This is ridiculous," I said. "I know. Then why are we even discussing it? Because someone wants us to." David leaned back in his chair. "I've worked with you for years. I don't believe this. But corporate policy requires us to investigate." My stomach tightened. "How bad is this?" He hesitated. "Bad enough that senior management is noticed. Bad enough that members of the promotion committee have started asking questions." The room suddenly felt smaller. For months, I had been preparing for this opportunity. Now anonymous accusations were becoming part of my professional record. Even if every claim was disproven, the damage could already be happening. People remember accusations. They rarely remember explanations. David seemed to read my thoughts. "Don't panic. We're going to verify everything. Facts matter. Evidence matters. But I need you to be honest with me. Can you think of anyone who might want to hurt your chances?" I considered the question carefully. Several names crossed my mind: former employees, disgruntled vendors, people unhappy with past decisions, but none of them felt right. The attacks were too consistent, too personal, too perfectly timed. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't identify a likely suspect. I shook my head. "I honestly don't know." David nodded slowly. "That's what worries me." The next few days became exhausting. Investigators reviewed emails, financial records, vendor contracts, meeting notes, everything. I cooperated fully. I had nothing to hide, yet the process itself felt humiliating. People watched, people whispered, people speculated. I could feel my reputation being examined under a microscope. Every mistake from the past decade suddenly looked suspicious. Every decision required explanation. Every success invited doubt. At home, things weren't much better. Ryan had become increasingly distant. Whenever I talked about the investigation, he seemed strangely calm, almost detached. One evening I asked him directly, "Doesn't this bother you?" "What do you mean? Someone is trying to destroy my career." He shrugged. "Maybe it's a sign." "A sign of what?" "Maybe this promotion isn't worth it." I stared at him. The answer felt bizarre. Most spouses would have been angry, protective, supportive. Ryan sounded almost hopeful, as if he wanted me to walk away. That weekend, we visited his mother. Linda greeted us with her usual artificial warmth. The moment dinner started, she brought up my promotion. I heard things have become complicated. I looked at Ryan. Had he told her? Of course he had. Apparently. Linda folded her hands. Maybe life is telling you something. Maybe you're focusing on the wrong priorities. I felt irritation rising. And what priorities should I focus on? Family, marriage, children, peace, not chasing power, not chasing status, not chasing titles. The words sounded rehearsed, like a speech she had delivered many times before. For years, Linda had criticized nearly every professional achievement I earned. When I received my first management position, she called it unnecessary ambition. When I bought my own car, she said successful women intimidated their husbands. When I started earning more than Ryan, she claimed money changed people. Nothing I accomplished was ever enough. Nothing was ever simply allowed to be good. That night, driving home, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. For the first time, a disturbing question entered my mind. What if this wasn't random? What if the anonymous complaints weren't coming from some disgruntled employee? What if they were coming from someone who genuinely wanted me to fail? Someone who felt threatened by my success? The idea seemed ridiculous, paranoid, unfair. So I pushed it away. I told myself I was imagining connections that didn't exist. I told myself stress was making me suspicious. I told myself Ryan and Linda would never do something like that. But while I was making excuses for them, David was uncovering information that would soon change everything. Because the investigation wasn't only proving my innocence, it was also revealing a pattern hidden inside the anonymous emails, and that pattern was leading directly towards someone I trusted. 3 days later, David called me into his office again. The moment I saw his face, I knew something had changed. He wasn't angry. He wasn't worried. He looked focused, like a man trying to solve a puzzle that had finally started making sense. "Close the door, Emily." I sat down. For a moment, he simply looked at a folder lying on his desk. Then he opened it. "We've finished reviewing the accusations involving contracts. And they're false. Every single one." Relief washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The evidence was clear. The investigation found no violations, no misconduct, no conflicts of interest, nothing. I should have felt victorious. Instead, David remained serious. That's not the interesting part. My stomach tightened again. "What do you mean?" He turned several pages toward me. "Look at these." The papers contained copies of anonymous emails, dozens of them. At first glance, they seemed identical to what I had already seen. But then David pointed at specific sentences. Read carefully. I did. The first message referenced an argument I supposedly had with a coworker after a company dinner. The second mentioned my habit of answering emails late at night. The third referred to stress I experienced during a difficult project 2 years earlier. The details seemed random until I realized something. These weren't public facts. Most employees wouldn't know them. Some weren't even work-related. One email referenced my fear of public speaking during the early years of my career. Another mentioned a vacation Ryan and I had taken several years ago. I looked up, confused. How would anyone know this? That's exactly the question. David folded his hands. "Emily, these messages contain personal information. Information that doesn't exist in company records. Information that someone would only know if they knew you personally." A chill ran through me. For the first time, the threat felt real, not professional, personal. Someone wasn't merely trying to block my promotion, someone wanted to damage me, specifically me. David continued. We've also noticed another pattern. Every email was written differently, different accounts, different names, different writing styles. But our IT team believes they may have originated from the same individual. My heart started pounding. Can they identify who? Not yet. The sender used multiple accounts and public networks. Whoever did this was careful, very careful. I left the office with more questions than answers. The drive home felt unusually long. My mind replayed every detail. Someone knew intimate facts about my life. Someone had access to information that should have been private. Someone had invested weeks, perhaps months, into building a campaign against me. That wasn't the behavior of an angry coworker. It wasn't the behavior of a disappointed candidate. It felt much closer to obsession. When I arrived home, Ryan was sitting at the kitchen table. The moment he saw me, he asked the same question he had been asking almost every day. Any updates? Something about his tone caught my attention. It sounded casual, yet strangely eager, as if he was waiting for news. I told him about the investigation, about the false accusations, about the personal details. Ryan listened quietly. Then he asked a question that immediately felt wrong. Do they have any suspects? I frowned. Not yet. He nodded, then quickly looked away. The reaction lasted less than a second, but I noticed it. For the first time, I truly noticed it. His shoulders relaxed, almost as if I had given him reassuring news. The feeling lingered long after the conversation ended. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 a.m, I woke up thirsty. As I walked downstairs toward the kitchen, I noticed light coming from the living room. Ryan was awake. He sat alone with his laptop. The screen disappeared the moment he heard my footsteps. He closed it so quickly that the motion looked almost automatic. Couldn't sleep, he said. Neither could I. For a few seconds, we simply stared at each other. Then he smiled. The same smile I had seen thousands of times. The same smile that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The next morning, I tried convincing myself I was overreacting. People worked late. People had private conversations. People became stressed during difficult situations. There were innocent explanations for everything. Still, something had changed inside me. A tiny crack had appeared. And once doubt enters a relationship, it rarely stays small. Over the following week, more strange moments followed. Whenever I entered a room unexpectedly, Ryan would lock his phone. Whenever I mentioned the investigation, he became uncomfortable. Whenever I talked about the promotion, he found reasons why it might not happen. Then came the moment that finally shattered my confidence. I returned home early one afternoon after a canceled meeting. Ryan didn't know I was coming. As I opened the front door, I heard his voice in the kitchen. He was speaking to someone. At first I assumed it was a friend. Then I recognized the second voice, Linda, his mother. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the words stopped me cold. It's getting harder, Ryan said. Maybe she should just withdraw. Linda answered immediately. She will if enough pressure is applied. Neither of them knew I was standing only a few feet away, and neither of them knew that those few words were about to change everything. Because for the first time since the nightmare began, I wasn't wondering whether my husband was involved. I was beginning to wonder how deeply involved he really was. I quietly stepped back from the kitchen doorway before either of them noticed me. My heart was pounding so hard that I was afraid they might hear it. Every instinct told me to walk into the room and demand an explanation, to ask Ryan exactly what he meant, to ask Linda what kind of pressure she was talking about. But another voice inside me said something different. Stay quiet, listen, learn. For weeks, I had been confused. For weeks, I had been reacting instead of observing. Now, for the first time, I had a chance to see what was really happening. I waited several seconds. Then I deliberately made noise near the front door before entering again. This time, they heard me coming. The conversation stopped instantly. When I walked into the kitchen, both of them looked perfectly calm, almost too calm. Ryan smiled. "You're home early. Meeting was canceled." Linda gave me one of her usual smiles, the kind that never reached her eyes. How nice. For the next 20 minutes, they talked about completely ordinary things: weather, traffic, a neighbor's new car. Not once did either of them mention the conversation I had overheard. Not once did they seem nervous. And somehow that made everything worse. Because innocent people usually explain themselves. People with nothing to hide don't suddenly change topics. That evening, after Linda left, I decided not to confront Ryan. Instead, I watched. And what I saw disturbed me. For years, I had trusted him completely. Trust has a strange effect on perception. It makes obvious things invisible. Once that trust begins to crack, patterns emerge everywhere. Ryan checked his phone constantly. He deleted messages. He took calls in other rooms. Sometimes he lowered his voice whenever I entered. Other times, he ended conversations immediately. Had he always done these things? Or had I simply never noticed? The question haunted me. 3 days later, another development shook my confidence. David called me again. This time he sounded unusually serious. "Can you come by after lunch?" Of course. When I arrived, the door was already closed. David wasn't alone. A member of the company's cybersecurity team sat beside him. The atmosphere felt different, more focused, more urgent. David motioned toward a chair. "Sit down. We found something." I immediately felt my pulse rise. The cybersecurity analyst opened a laptop. "We've been tracking the anonymous accounts, not the accounts themselves, the behavior behind them." I frowned. "Behavior?" He nodded. "Most people think anonymity depends on technology. In reality, people leave patterns everywhere. Writing habits, login schedules, activity times, usage behavior." The analyst displayed several charts. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then he explained. Every anonymous account became active during similar periods, late evenings, weekends, specific time windows. The pattern repeated again and again. And whoever created these accounts appears to operate around a very predictable schedule. The analyst clicked another screen. One particular detail stood out. The majority of activity occurred between 9 and 11 at night. I stared at the chart. Something about it felt familiar. Then realization hit me. Those were the hours Ryan usually spent alone downstairs. The same hours I was often upstairs reading or sleeping. The same hours he claimed to be watching videos or catching up on news. A chill spread through my body. No, that couldn't mean anything. It was just a coincidence. Thousands of people were awake during those hours. David seemed to notice my reaction. "Emily, you okay?" I forced a smile. "Just tired." The meeting continued. The analyst explained that tracing the source directly remained difficult. Whoever was responsible had taken precautions, but mistakes were beginning to appear. Small mistakes, human mistakes, and human mistakes often lead to answers. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking, not about the evidence, about Ryan, about Linda, about the conversation in the kitchen, about the strange relief on Ryan's face whenever my problems worsened. The pieces were beginning to form a picture I desperately wanted to reject. That evening, I decided to test something. At dinner, I casually announced that management was considering closing the investigation. It wasn't true. I simply wanted to observe their reactions. Linda happened to be visiting. The moment I spoke, both of them froze, only for a second, but I saw it. Panic. Then it disappeared. Ryan recovered first. That's good news. His voice sounded forced, very forced. Linda quickly agreed. Yes, very good news. The problem was that neither of them looked happy. They looked worried. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Normal people celebrate good news. These two seemed disappointed by it. That night, I sat alone in the dark living room after Ryan went to bed. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that had terrified me for weeks. What if the anonymous campaign wasn't coming from a stranger? What if it wasn't a competitor? What if it wasn't a disgruntled employee? What if the people trying to destroy my future were the same people sitting across from me at dinner? The thought felt impossible, unthinkable. And yet the evidence was slowly pushing me toward that conclusion. What I didn't know was that the biggest mistake of all had already happened. Because somewhere among hundreds of anonymous messages, one small detail had escaped notice. A detail so specific that it would soon connect the entire scheme directly to Ryan's mother. And once that connection was discovered, the truth would begin unraveling faster than any of them expected. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning. At first, it looked insignificant. Just another email, just another accusation, just another piece of the nightmare that had consumed my life for months. But sometimes the smallest details become the most important. David called me shortly after 10. His voice sounded different, not excited, not concerned, certain. "Emily, can you come upstairs?" I was in his office less than 5 minutes later. The cybersecurity analyst was there again. This time, both men looked like they had finally found something. David handed me a printed document. "Take a look at paragraph 3. I read it carefully. At first, nothing stood out. Then I reached a sentence describing my personality. The anonymous writer claimed that I had always been obsessed with proving I was better than everyone else. That wasn't unusual. The emails were full of insults. But then came a phrase that made me freeze. A phrase I hadn't heard in years. Little Miss Perfect. My eyes stopped moving. I read the words again, then again, and again. The room suddenly felt silent. Emily? David was watching me closely. Do those words mean something? I nodded slowly. My throat had gone dry. Yes. Who uses that expression? For several seconds, I couldn't answer, because the truth sounded ridiculous, almost childish. Yet I knew exactly where I had heard it. Linda, Ryan's mother. For years, she'd used that nickname whenever she wanted to criticize me. Not in public, never openly, only during private conversations, only when she wanted to remind me that she didn't approve of my ambitions. Little Miss Perfect. The phrase echoed in my mind. How many times had I heard it? 20? 50? 100? I couldn't even count anymore. David leaned forward. You're sure? Very sure. I've never heard anyone else say it. The analyst exchanged a glance with David. Neither man spoke for several seconds. Finally, David broke the silence. That isn't evidence, but it is a lead. A very interesting lead. I understood exactly what he meant. One phrase wouldn't prove anything. It could be coincidence. It could be imitation. It could be nothing. Yet deep inside, I already knew it wasn't nothing, because the moment I saw those words, a dozen memories returned. Comments, insults, conversations, patterns, things I had ignored for years, things that suddenly looked very different. I left the office feeling shaken, not because I had answers, because I was starting to lose excuses. For weeks, I had defended Ryan and Linda in my mind. Every strange behavior, every suspicious reaction, every inconsistency, I always found an explanation. Now those explanations were disappearing. That evening, Linda called. Normally, I would have ignored the significance, but now I listened carefully. Every word mattered. Every tone mattered. Every phrase mattered. She asked about work. She asked about the promotion. She asked whether the investigation was still active. Then she laughed softly. You know, Emily, sometimes people simply see through Little Miss Perfect. The world seemed to stop. My grip tightened around the phone. There it was, the exact phrase, the exact words, spoken naturally, without hesitation, without realizing what she had just confirmed. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Linda continued talking, completely unaware. And in that moment, something changed inside me. Not anger, not fear, clarity. For the first time, I stopped wondering whether she was involved. I knew she was. The only remaining question was Ryan. How much did he know? How much had he helped? How far had he gone? That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I got out of bed and walked downstairs. The house was quiet. Ryan was asleep upstairs, or so I thought. As I passed the study, I noticed light under the door. The room should have been empty. Slowly, I approached. I heard typing, rapid typing, then the faint sound of an email notification. My heart started pounding. The door wasn't fully closed, only slightly open, just enough to see part of the screen. I wasn't trying to spy, at least that's what I told myself, but I couldn't stop looking. For a split second, I saw an email account, a name I didn't recognize, a generic address, random numbers, random letters. Then Ryan suddenly moved. I stepped back immediately. My pulse exploded. A second later, the door opened. Ryan looked surprised. "What are you doing awake?" "Couldn't sleep." He studied my face. For a moment, I thought he knew. I thought he had caught me. But then he smiled, the same careful smile he had been wearing for weeks, and I realized something terrifying. He was lying, not occasionally, not recently, constantly. The next morning, David called before I even reached the office. "Emily, we need to talk, immediately." Something else had been discovered, something much bigger than a nickname. Because during the night, the cybersecurity team had finally traced one of the anonymous accounts to a specific device. And the name attached to that device was about to confirm every fear I had been trying to deny. I barely remember the drive to work. My hand stayed tight on the steering wheel the entire way. Part of me wanted answers. Another part was terrified of them. For weeks, I had been chasing shadows. Now the shadows were beginning to take shape, and I wasn't sure I was ready to see their faces. When I arrived, David was already waiting. The cybersecurity analyst sat beside him. Neither man looked surprised to see me. They looked prepared, as if they had spent the entire night putting pieces together. David motioned toward a chair. "Sit down." I did. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Finally, the analyst opened a folder. We traced one of the anonymous accounts. My heart started racing. To who? Not directly, but close enough. He turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a detailed report, login histories, device identifiers, connection records. Most of it looked like a foreign language. Then I saw the address. Linda Harrison, Ryan's mother. For a moment, I simply stared. No shock, no surprise, just a strange sense of inevitability. Somewhere deep inside, I think I already knew. David spoke carefully. The account wasn't registered in her name, but one login originated from a tablet connected to her home network. One mistake, one moment of carelessness. That's all it took. The room felt strangely quiet. The evidence wasn't enough for legal action, not yet. But it was enough to eliminate coincidence, enough to establish a connection, enough to confirm that Linda had access to at least one anonymous account. I lowered my eyes, and suddenly 12 years of memories started rearranging themselves. Comments that once seemed harmless, criticism disguised as concern, constant reminders that I wasn't good enough, not feminine enough, not family-oriented enough, not grateful enough. For years, she had tried to diminish every achievement. Now I finally understood why. It had never been accidental. It had always been intentional. David leaned forward. "Emily, there's something else." The words immediately tightened my chest. "What?" The analyst exchanged a glance with him. Then he opened another file. "This information is more concerning because it suggests collaboration." I felt my stomach drop. Collaboration? With who? The analyst clicked several screens. One anonymous account had never connected to Linda's network. Instead, it consistently logged in through a different device, a laptop, a personal laptop. And while the device name wasn't visible, its activity pattern matched another person almost perfectly. I already knew. Before he said it. Before anyone said it. I knew. Ryan. Nobody spoke. The silence itself became an answer. The analyst nodded slowly. "We're not saying this proves he wrote the emails, but the device activity overlaps with his known schedule almost exactly. Evening hours, late-night sessions, weekend activity, the same windows used by the anonymous accounts." My vision blurred slightly, not because I was surprised, because hearing it spoken aloud made it real. Up until that moment, suspicion still allowed room for hope. Evidence does not. I looked down at my hands. 12 years. 12 years of marriage. 12 years of trust. And suddenly, I couldn't remember the last time I had truly known the man I lived with. David's voice softened. "Emily, are you okay?" I laughed. The sound barely resembled a laugh. "No, not really." The meeting ended shortly afterward. I spent the rest of the day pretending to work, pretending to focus, pretending my life wasn't collapsing. But underneath the surface, something had changed. The fear was disappearing. In its place came anger. Not explosive anger, not emotional anger, something colder, something sharper. For months, I had been defending them, protecting them, giving them the benefit of every doubt, while they were actively trying to destroy my future. That realization changed everything. That evening, I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I sat alone in my car outside a coffee shop, thinking, planning. For the first time, I stopped asking whether Ryan was involved. I started asking how much damage he had caused. The answer came sooner than expected, because just before 8 o'clock, David called again. His voice sounded more serious than ever. "Emily, we found another email." "So?" "This one wasn't sent to Human Resources. It wasn't sent to management. It was sent to the promotion committee." My pulse accelerated. What did it say? There was a long pause. Then David answered. "It claimed you were planning to leave the company after receiving the promotion." I frowned. "That's ridiculous." "I know, but that's not the important part." "What is?" Another pause. The email included information that only 3 people knew. Me, you, and the person you discussed your future plans with at home. The world seemed to stop. Because 3 weeks earlier, I had shared a private conversation with Ryan, a conversation about a possible 5-year career plan, a conversation that had never happened at work, never appeared in an email, never existed in company records. Only Ryan knew. only Ryan. And suddenly, the final piece slid into place. The anonymous sender wasn't simply someone connected to my husband. The anonymous sender was my husband. And for months, he had been helping his mother destroy the career I had spent 12 years building. What neither of them knew was that I had finally stopped being their victim, and the next move would be mine. That night, I sat in my car for nearly an hour, not crying, not screaming, not falling apart. Oddly enough, the breakdown never came, perhaps because the truth had arrived in pieces, one lie at a time, one clue at a time, one betrayal at a time. By the moment David confirmed Ryan's involvement, I had already spent weeks preparing myself for the possibility. The shock was gone. What remained was clarity. For months, I had been fighting invisible enemies. Now they had names, Ryan and Linda. I finally knew who they were. The next question was simple. What was I going to do about it? When I walked into the house that evening, Ryan was sitting on the couch watching television. He smiled when he saw me. The sight almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it looked so absurd. There he was, the man who had spent months helping destroy my career, the man who kissed me goodbye every morning, the man who asked about the investigation every evening, the man who pretended to care. "How was your day?" he asked. "Busy. Anything new?" I forced a tired smile. "Nothing important." The disappointment that flashed across his face lasted less than a second, but it was there, and for the first time I recognized it immediately. He wanted bad news. He had been hoping for bad news all along. That realization hurt far more than the anonymous emails ever had. The next morning, I met with David before work. We sat alone in his office. No investigators, no analysts, just the two of us. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I stared out the window. For months, Ryan and Linda had controlled the story. Every move belonged to them. Every attack came from them. Every decision was theirs. I was tired of reacting. I want proof. David nodded. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Over the following days, we began building a plan. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic. Just patience. Patience and observation. The cybersecurity team continued tracking activity. Management continued documenting evidence. And I continued pretending everything was normal. That turned out to be easier than I expected, because Ryan wanted to believe I knew nothing. Every liar depends on confidence. Every deception depends on certainty. As long as he believed he was winning, he would continue making mistakes, and mistakes were exactly what we needed. A week later, another opportunity appeared. Management decided to announce that the promotion process was entering its final stage. Only 2 candidates remained, me and one senior manager from another division. The announcement was confidential. Only a small number of people knew. When David told me, he immediately added something else. "Let's see what happens next." I understood his meaning. If another anonymous email appeared discussing information that had not been publicly released, we would know the leak continued. The question was simple. Who would receive the information? David, me, and no one else, at least officially. That evening, I mentioned the update to Ryan during dinner. Only casually, the way a wife might share normal work news. His reaction was immediate. "Really? Only 2 candidates left?" I nodded. "Looks that way." He tried to appear supportive, but I noticed something else. Nervousness. For the first time, Ryan looked worried. Not about me, about himself. 3 days later, the trap worked. An anonymous email arrived. The message accused me of manipulating executives to eliminate competing candidates. The accusation was ridiculous, but that wasn't important. What mattered was the information inside it. The email referenced the exact number of remaining candidates. 2. A number that had never been publicly disclosed. A number Ryan had only learned from me. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. David called me immediately. The moment I entered his office, he handed me a printed copy. I didn't even need to read it. I already knew. He took the bait. The words felt strangely satisfying. Months earlier, I would have felt devastated. Now I felt something different. Control. For the first time since the nightmare began, the situation was moving in my direction. The following week brought another breakthrough, a major one. The cybersecurity team discovered that one anonymous account had accidentally synchronized with a cloud backup service. Only briefly, only for a few minutes, but it was enough. Enough to reveal fragments of deleted content, enough to reveal draft messages, enough to reveal communication between two people coordinating their attacks, Ryan and Linda. The evidence wasn't complete, but it showed exactly what investigators needed to see: planning, timing, coordination, intent, months of it. When David showed me the report, neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he leaned back. "I think this is over." I slowly shook my head. No, this isn't over. Not yet. Because proving what they did at work was only part of the story. The deeper betrayal still remained hidden. And 2 nights later, I accidentally uncovered it. A discovery that explained why Ryan had been so desperate to stop my promotion. A discovery that had nothing to do with marriage, nothing to do with family, and everything to do with money. A lot of money. More money than I ever imagined. Because while searching through financial documents that weekend, I found evidence that Ryan and Linda weren't only trying to destroy my career. They had already been preparing for a future without me. The discovery happened on a Saturday afternoon, completely by accident. I wasn't searching for hidden money. I wasn't trying to investigate Ryan, at least not directly. I was simply organizing paperwork. For years, financial documents had accumulated inside a cabinet in our home office. Tax records, insurance papers, mortgage statements, investment reports. The kind of documents most people ignore until they absolutely need them. Ryan was visiting his mother. The house was quiet. I had the entire afternoon to myself. And for reasons I still can't fully explain, I decided to review everything. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was suspicion. Or maybe some part of me already knew I was looking for answers. About an hour later, I found the first inconsistency. A bank statement. Nothing dramatic. Just an account number I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed it belonged to Ryan. We each maintained separate personal accounts in addition to our shared finances. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the balance. I looked twice to make sure I wasn't misreading it. Then a third time. The account contained nearly $180,000. My breath caught. I had never seen that account before, never heard Ryan mention it, never received a statement, never signed paperwork connected to it. And yet there it was, an active account, hidden from me. My first reaction was confusion. The second was disbelief. The third was fear. Because suddenly dozens of conversations from the previous year started replaying in my mind. We can't afford a vacation. We need to cut expenses. Money is tight. The promotion would help us financially. The mortgage is becoming stressful. Every single one of those statements now felt different. What if they weren't true? I kept searching, and what I found next was worse. Far worse. Inside another folder sat copies of property records. At first, I assumed they belonged to Linda. Then I noticed the purchase date, 8 months earlier. The owner listed on the documents was not Ryan, not Linda, not anyone I recognized. The name belonged to a trust, a private family trust. I read the paperwork carefully, then again, then a third time. And suddenly the connection became obvious. Several names appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. One of them was Linda, another was Ryan. My hands started shaking. The property had been purchased quietly, without my knowledge, without any discussion, without any explanation, and the down payment had originated from the same hidden account, the account containing $180,000. For several minutes, I simply sat there, unable to move, unable to think, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't impulsive behavior. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a secret purchase made out of embarrassment. This was planning, long-term planning, careful planning, the kind of planning people make when they're building a future that doesn't include you. I felt physically sick. 12 years of marriage, 12 years of shared goals, 12 years of sacrifices, and all along Ryan had been preparing something behind my back. The realization hurt more than the anonymous emails, more than the investigation, more than the betrayal at work, because careers can be rebuilt. Trust is harder, much harder. I immediately copied everything, every statement, every record, every document. Then I returned everything exactly where I found it. Ryan could not know, not yet. That evening he came home smiling. Apparently dinner with Linda had gone well. I listened. I nodded. I pretended everything was normal. Inside, however, everything had changed. For the first time, I understood the real motive. The promotion had never been the entire problem. Money was. Control was. Independence was. If I received the promotion, my salary would increase dramatically. My influence inside the company would grow. My financial security would strengthen. Most importantly, I would become harder to manipulate, harder to control, harder to leave behind. Ryan and Linda didn't just want me to fail. They needed me to fail because their future depended on it. The next Monday, I showed the documents to David. I expected shock. Instead, he became very quiet. After nearly 10 minutes of reviewing everything, he slowly looked up. "Emily, I think you're about to learn something even worse." The words immediately tightened my chest. "What do you mean?" He pointed toward a series of transfers, the dates, the amounts, the destinations. Then he explained what he was seeing, and within seconds, my entire understanding of the situation changed, because the hidden account wasn't funded only by Ryan. Some of the money appeared to come from somewhere else, somewhere much closer to me, much closer than either of us expected. At that moment, neither David nor I knew exactly how deep the deception went, but one thing had become painfully clear. Ryan and Linda were no longer making mistakes. They were becoming desperate. And desperate people often make one final move, a move so reckless that it destroys everything. Fortunately for me, that final move was already coming, and when it arrived, it would give me everything I needed to expose them once and for all. The final collapse began on a Thursday morning. By then, Ryan still believed he was in control. Linda still believed she was the smartest person in every room, and neither of them knew that every document had already been collected. Every transfer had been traced. Every lie had been connected. The company had scheduled a formal review meeting regarding the anonymous complaints. Officially, it was simply the final stage of the investigation. Unofficially, it was the moment everything would fall apart. When I entered the conference room, Ryan was already there. So was Linda. Neither of them expected to see me. Ryan looked confused. Linda looked annoyed. David sat at the far end of the table beside representatives from human resources, legal, and corporate security. The atmosphere felt heavy, serious, final. Ryan looked at me. "What's going on?" I didn't answer. For months I had answered questions. Today I was done explaining. The meeting began. The head of human resources reviewed the investigation, every anonymous complaint, every accusation, every allegation. One by one, they were dismissed, unsupported, false, unsubstantiated. The list seemed endless. Ryan remained calm. Linda remained calm. Then corporate security began presenting evidence. The room changed immediately. Login records appeared on the screen. Device histories, account activity, connection reports. The first time Linda's home network appeared on the monitor, her face lost color, only slightly, but I saw it. Then came the anonymous accounts, the timestamps, the coordination, the communication patterns, the mistakes, all the small details they thought nobody would ever notice. Ryan's confidence began disappearing, slowly. Then David presented the final report. The room became completely silent. The report connected the anonymous campaign directly to devices used by Ryan and Linda. Not assumptions, not theories, evidence, months of evidence. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Linda finally broke. "This is ridiculous. You're making assumptions. You can't prove I wrote anything." The legal representative calmly opened another file. "Actually, we can prove access. We can prove coordination, and we can prove intent." Linda's face turned pale. Ryan immediately turned toward her. "Why didn't you stop?" The room froze. Linda stared at him. "What? You said they would never find anything." The words escaped before he realized what he had admitted. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Linda exploded. "Don't you dare blame this on me. You were the one sending half those emails." Ryan stood up. "Because you kept pushing me. You said she would leave me behind. You said she'd eventually think she was better than us." The argument grew louder. Years of manipulation, years of resentment, years of lies, suddenly pouring into the open. They accused each other of everything. The anonymous complaints, the fake stories, the sabotage, the planning. Every minute they spoke only made things worse, because every accusation they threw at each other confirmed another piece of the investigation. Finally, David raised his hand. "We're not finished." The room fell silent again. Then he placed the financial records on the table. The hidden account, the trust, the property purchase, the forged authorizations, the transfers from my deferred compensation account. The color disappeared from Ryan's face completely. This time there was no explanation, no excuse, no story, only silence. I looked at him. For the first time in months, he couldn't meet my eyes. "Emily," his voice sounded weak. "Please let me explain." I almost laughed. Months earlier, I would have listened. Months earlier, I would have believed him. Not anymore. Explain what? The forged signatures, the stolen money, the emails, the lies? Which part would you like to explain first? Ryan lowered his head. For the first time since I had known him, he had nothing to say. Linda tried one final time. "Emily, you don't understand." "No," I interrupted her calmly. "For once, I understand perfectly." The room became silent. I looked at both of them. The people who had spent years convincing me I wasn't enough. The people who smiled at me while working against me. The people who wanted me to fail because my success threatened them. And suddenly I felt nothing. No hatred, no anger, no desire for revenge, only relief. because I was finally free. The divorce proceedings began shortly afterward. Ryan tried contacting me several times. I never responded. There was nothing left to discuss. Trust had already been buried long before the paperwork started. 3 months later, the promotion committee reached its decision. I received the position, not because of sympathy, not because of what happened, because the truth had finally been uncovered, because my work had survived every attempt to destroy it. On my first day as Regional Operations Director, I arrived early. The office was quiet. Sunlight filled the room. For several minutes, I stood alone looking out over the city, thinking about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the investigation, the lies, the loss. And then I thought about something else, the future. For the first time in years, my future belonged entirely to me. No one was secretly holding me back. No one was whispering doubts into my ear. No one was waiting for me to fail. I sat down behind my desk and smiled, not because I had won, because I no longer needed to fight. And as the morning sun filled the room, I realized something that finally brought me peace. The people who tried hardest to stop my future had only removed themselves from it, and that was the ending they deserved.